It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. Joining me on the show today is Dalli. He's the co-founder of Clarus Designs, a consulting firm specializing in corporate growth through efficient scaling to maximize potential. So, Greg, welcome to Accelerate.
Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited.
Oh, good. So take a minute, fill out the introduction. How'd you get your start in business? How'd you get your start doing what you're doing?
So I guess it really started when I was 6 years old. I had some kind of medical issues, and over the course of a week, kind of went from normal eyesight to being legally blind. And so through that process, kind of like spent a lot of time trying to adapt and cope, and pretty quickly learned that, the techniques and tools that people use to solve problems on a daily basis, whether it's ordering food or crossing the street, were not going to work for me. And so kind of developed this thought process where I would approach problems assuming that what everyone else was doing was not going to work. And so kind of lent itself well
it's not
to
going to work
when
for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, so it lent itself well to, once I graduated college, I landed at a startup, and I was became their first business intelligence analyst, and kind of thought about scaling and thought about problems, and just ignored all the research out there and all the best practices, and kind of went about trying to figure out and doing a lot of testing to figure out what worked and what didn't. And so from that, the company ended up doing really well. I think they were around 30 million when they're actually about like 15 million when I got there, and I think closer to 200 when I left 3 years later. So it worked really well, and I really enjoyed the process of problem solving and growing. And so wanted to do that for other companies to kind of see if, I was mostly curious if this idea of assuming that, the best practices won't work, and thinking through what to do, objectively, if that would work. And so my partner and I started Clarus Designs about a year and a half ago, and been doing that ever since.
So what is it you do?
So the idea is we help sales and marketing teams make better decisions and grow using data. So instead of relying on, experience or what Google does or things like that, like we focus on looking at your data and helping you look at it in a way to make better decisions and grow that way.
All right. So you've got this statement on your website that you say we eliminate duplicate and inconsistent data by identifying the source of truth. So what is the truth?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, I mean, it really varies case by case, right? I think, you're gonna have some companies where, their source of truth is going to be based on kind of like a sales process or a marketing process. It really varies, but I think the problem that you run into is you have different departments and different teams kind of quoting different numbers. Mm-hmm. So a big part of being able to make data-driven decisions is getting to a common source of truth. That's kind of something we learned when we started this. We kind of went into it thinking, we're going to take everyone's data, do some fancy analysis. It's going to be a lot of fun. And then we pretty quickly learned, no one really has clean data. So we kind of have to start there to be able to do the fun stuff.
So truth, what you're saying is truth is subjective.
Yeah. I mean, I think that most things in startups are subjective. I think it's based on whatever your goals are.
All right. So as I like to say, truth is a relative value, not an absolute value. So, which it's true in life in general, right? So, so when you're talking about data that you're helping companies with, so give examples of the data that you're analyzing to help them make better decisions.
So, a lot of what we do is trying to kind of simplify what people are looking at and focus on things that are actionable. So an example is, there's a lot of data points that people are focused on that really are not very actionable. So an example of that is, you see a lot of research around how many touches it takes to get a hold of a contact. And so because of that, companies are really focused on activity metrics and how many emails are we sending as a company and as a team, and how many touches per rep or per contact does it take to connect with someone and things like that. And, it's definitely not super easy to track that stuff. It's kind of labor intensive. But more importantly, it's not as valuable as people think. Having, perfect visibility.
Okay. There's the catch. It's not easy to find the data. And once you get it, it doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah. So,
interesting.
Knowing that it takes, 5 emails on average, as opposed to 7 or 8 or 3, it's not really going to change what you do. And so,
well, it's not going to change what you do, meaning what?
Meaning that if you tell a sales leader, hey, I can tell you with 100% accuracy, it takes 7 emails to reach a prospect, their SDRs are still going to be emailing and calling. It's not like they're going to say, okay, well, it's been 7, so we're going to stop emailing, because if it's an average, then you would expect, if it's a normally distributed average, you'd expect half those contacts to need more. And so it ends up not being very helpful. And so focusing on, are we sending 200 emails, or are we sending, are we emailing everyone 5 or 6 or 7 times? It ends up not really changing the business and not really changing how people act on a day-to-day basis.
So how do you control for the variables in the message in the email, the subject line, an opening sentence, anything that has the impact of influencing the prospect, whether to A, either read the email based on subject line, or B, having read the email, take any sort of action?
For the most part, you don't really. You could do that, and you could say, you could A/B test different subject lines or different messages. But generally, when we talk to companies that are really interested in kind of those types of activity metrics, we tend to tell them to focus on other things, just because we haven't found that is very useful to focus on.
Okay, saying it to sort of buttress your point, which was that whether it's 9 touches or 13 touches, you said it almost doesn't really matter. And some of the details about A/B testing, some of the components and so on, almost seem like they have less relevance as well. So what does matter in those situations?
I think what matters is, not focusing on like specific metrics, but focusing on metrics in relation to like other changes. So an example would be, not just focusing on new customers, but looking at like new customer growth in relation to average sales price, sales cycle, things like that. Because what you'll find is, in a lot of cases, if you show me a company who doubled the number of customers they brought on last quarter, I guarantee you their average selling price decreased by a lot, right? Because the easiest way to do that is to either discount or bring on smaller customers. So I think it's more about like educating companies and educating leaders who don't necessarily come from a data-centric background into how to think about the data they have and how to use that to manage better.
Well, let's finish up on this point with the one you just talked about, because you're right. People are getting increasingly focused on even more granular metrics in their sales process, and it seems to me, to the point you made, is that we're getting into the situation where you sort of can't see the forest for the trees type syndrome when it comes to these things.
Yeah.
So what is the answer? So we have frontline managers that, have not just frontline, but through up and down the chain. People have activity metrics. Especially in the SaaS business, they thrive on and subsist on activity metrics. So what do you recommend that people do instead to help shape the process in a way that it produces the outcomes that they want?
Yeah. So what we suggest is, if you want to have activity metrics, I think that's fine. Nothing wrong with that, but enforce that alongside some type of success metric. So meaning that, if you are going to say, you need to send 200 emails a week, you should also have some goal around like your connect rates. You want to connect with, you're doing that so that you can connect with 20 new people a week or something like that. Mm-hmm. So and that way you kind of get both, because what ends up happening is as soon as you say, hey, you need to email 200 people, the quality of those emails goes down, the number of people you're connecting with goes down, and you kind of, to what you were saying about losing sight of the big picture, you kind of forget why you're actually doing that, and that is to connect with people to close deals. So I think having some type of success metric that just isn't based on volume and how many people you can blast emails to, or something that is more effort based, like having a success criteria, I think is the key there.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I just wonder whether, and I was thinking about this as you're talking, is whether or not you could have, well, I guess maybe not. Maybe answering my own question, so I'm about getting ready to pose it for you, is, so what if you went the opposite extreme and just had a success metric?
Yeah, so I mean, you could also do that. I think if the success metric is kind of like is volume based and not percentage based, then I think that's fine, right? Like saying that your success metric is a 15% success rate or connect rate, for example, like that's probably not, there's probably room for error there, right? Because you could have that connect rate, but only connect with 4 people, depending on what your kind of denominator is.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that, and I mean, I think that inherently there are a lot of success metrics that are like that. If you're an SDR, like more likely than not, your goal is number of meetings. You know what I mean? It's not percent of, like a meeting conversion rate or something like that. But I think where the problem lies is you have these end metrics, whether it's, meeting set or dollars closed, that are very kind of volume based, but the secondary metrics and the secondary ways that people are evaluated to get to there are such that it lends itself to kind of screw you in the long run.
You being the company or the individial?
I mean, both, right?
Yeah.
I think that just because you don't end up hitting your goals, you see this a lot in the way that companies talk about pipeline coverage, right? When they'll say, we need 5x pipeline coverage, meaning if on the first day of the quarter we have 5x in pipeline, what our goal is, then we're going to hit our goal because that's what happened last quarter, the last year, something like that. And so then managers are like, okay, let's fill that pipeline. And then you ultimately, when that's the focus, just filling the pipeline, you end up with a lot of stale opportunities or opportunities where the amounts are exaggerated or things like that. And then
or just plainly unqualified.
Yeah, right. And
because
then
if your goal, if your incentive is, I want to get names and logos into my pipeline, then you'll be less concerned about the quality.
Yeah, but the crazy thing is, so the company will miss their quarter, and then they'll look at they'll be data driven and look at the numbers and say, oh well, actually, given last quarter, we actually need 7x pipeline coverage in order to hit our goal. So then instead of saying, well, maybe this is like not the best way to kind of manage to our goal, so then they'll go for 7x, and then the problem continues.
Yeah, well, it sort of breaks down to several stats. I mean, one is, instead of having 7x coverage, they could just say, we need 12 deals.
Yeah, I mean, you run into problems there as well, because if that's kind of the goal you set, you will tend to kind of close smaller deals if that's kind of what you're aiming for, right?
Why do you think if you have a quantity based goal that's opposed to a percent coverage, it's the thing that's really driving your work, why do you think that encourages smaller deals?
Well, I mean, if you're telling your reps, I just need 10 deals out of you this quarter, I need 12 deals out of you this quarter. If there's not some regulation around like the types of deals, I would worry that you would end up with 12 small deals. Yeah,
I meant, if you had done the math, you say, hey, we divide the number, it comes up to 10 deals, right? So,
I see what you mean. Yes, that would be better.
Yeah, I think that, I wonder, and you tell me, is it seems certainly from the research I've done and the companies I've talked to, that you get sort of a glimmer of a little bit of a pushback about these strict adherence to activity metrics, because it takes some of the initiative away from the salespeople. In terms of there's a way they could do it better, thus the coverage ratios don't necessarily work for John because John John just does things differently, and for him, 2 times coverage is what he needs. Yeah, he's going to press to get 7, even though 2 would work fine for him.
Yeah, totally. I think what it boils, in my opinion, I think what it boils down to is the more stressful the situation, and I would say startups are fairly stressful in terms of the expectations set and the pressure to perform.
Is extremely stressful.
Totally. So I think that the more stressful the situation, I think the more likely people are to crave that control, right? And I think that by having your metrics be activity based, something where I could just sit down in an hour and bust out 100 emails or find 50 new contacts, but I can't just sit down for an hour and set 5 meetings. That's not really in my control. So I think that given the stress of the job, I think there's this natural gravitation towards control, and I think that that's how control is expressed in the sales world is focusing on metrics that you can that's very correlated with time in terms of the ability to affect that metric.
But you're saying they're not correlated with outcomes?
No, I mean not in our experience. I mean, you probably talk to more companies than we do, but I mean
to me that's the big problem that I see is that a lot of activity is not necessarily correlated to outcomes unless you put enough numbers behind it. And then ultimately the numbers begin to win out.
Yeah.
But they're not necessarily scalable.
Yep. I mean, yeah, when I was at my last company, there was this one rep who, would send more emails than anyone else, and one SDR send more emails than anyone else, and maybe would set 15 meetings a month. And there was another SDR that maybe sent 30 emails a month or 40 emails a month, but ended up with the same 15 meetings. And I think it's scary to say, this person has something that works, so we're okay with them averaging 1.3 emails a day. You know what I mean?
Well, I think it raises a whole nother question, which is the one that I think you and I had spoken once on the phone about this several months ago, is really what is productivity in sales? Because you just raised a great point. So yeah, if you have somebody that's sending out 1.4 emails per day versus somebody that's sending 100 per day, and yet they're closing the same amount of deals, then you have somebody whose productivity, A, is extremely high, but B, they have unused capacity that they're not putting to use that they could use to sell even more. And this is where companies don't really think about it this way, right? I mean, if you had that guy that was sending 1.4 emails per day and was closing the same as somebody sending 100, who let's say was also meeting target, I'd look at that and say the guy 1.4 is like, well, hell, you should be doing a lot more. Because if you just exercised a little bit more of your time, even if you just did double what you're doing, you're saying 2.8 per day, which is not stressing you out, theoretically, you would have a marginal increase in your sales somewhere between 2 and 2 times and 0, but it'd be more.
Maybe but I think that the other way to look at that is that person is sending so few emails because they're so targeted, and that person is trying to reaching the exact right person every time. You know what I mean? I think I could also make the argument. I mean, put it this way: you would never tell the person sending 100 emails a day that, hey, you could probably just work a couple more hours, send 200 emails a day, and you'd be golden. You know what I mean?
Well, no, but I wasn't saying they'd work more. What I'm saying though is that you have somebody that's that's fully loaded, 100 emails a day. They're spending, let's say they work to the industry statistics in terms of they're spending 35-40% of their time actually selling, and then the rest doing whatever they need to do, finding content, building their list, so on. And then you got this other person who's spending sending 1.4 per day, and not to get too hung up on this example, but by necessity, they're going to have a lot more free time during that day. So it's not like for them to send out 2.8 emails or so on is going to require them to stay after work. And this is the thing I think we get the difference in productivity that managers don't really focus on, which is, if you have somebody like this that's really performing at a high rate, they undoubtedly are getting more accomplished with less expenditure of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
that's true.
that means there's more time available for them that if they just did 50% more, theoretically, again, their incremental return on that would be somewhere between 0 and 50% more. But it would be more of something. And that's what I think, that's the productivity conundrum I think we have, is that we don't gauge what people are accomplishing based on the amount of time they're investing in doing it.
Yeah. Well, I think back again to that kind of need for control. I think time is something that's really hard to quantify. You know what I mean? It's very easy for a sales manager to look in Salesforce and see how many emails are sent. I think it's very hard for them to accurately say, you spent 12 or 15 or 20 hours crafting emails and sending emails.
Well, so that's a question I have for you is, so what are you seeing out there in terms of the tools that are coming out? Because there are some, I know, they're getting close to being able to capture that information. How much time you're spending creating emails, how much time you're on the phone, and so on. And I don't think I know some people push back, say that's sort of big brotherish that you're knowing every second, but it's not, it's not a time motion study. It's based on how many hours are you investing to get a certain outcome. Yeah.
I think that technology will obviously continue to get better. I think, once again though, I don't know if actually, understanding time is the key there. I think it's understanding efficiency and effectiveness. And,
well, how are you measuring it?
Theoretically, I think it would be, your results per hour of work or something like that.
Right. So, and that's how we measure productivity in the economy at large, right? A rate of output per unit of input.
Yeah, that's fair. So yeah, I don't know.
To me, that's sort of the great frontier for sales, because people we want to create more selling time for salespeople, right? That if they perform let's say they have a certain output of revenue for 1 hour of selling time, we could do the math and come up with that for all of them. What we sort of talk about now is let's make more selling time for them during the day. Get the bureaucratic stuff off their plate, to make sure that they don't have to search for content, all these things we can do to free up selling time. Yeah, that's great. But what if we could raise that top number, the numerator, and increase the rate of output per hour?
I think that, I see where you're coming from. I think that, if in addition to being able to measure time, we can somehow kind of enforce time spent, then I could definitely see that being valuable. I think, the problem there is that, there's a lot of sales tools, right, that will say, we're going to save X number of hours a month per rep, which means that it's this many more sales, right? And then there's this inherent assumption that if my rep spends 2 less hours per month, generating order forms or prospecting or sending follow-up emails, that they're going to be spending those 2 hours selling. And I don't know if that's
not a good assumption, right?
Yeah, I don't know if that will happen. So, I'm thinking.
I don't think it does.
Yeah, so, I think that there's kind of this productivity kind of fallacy kind of going on where
exactly, and that's why so look at the perspective I was telling you. So I'm not assuming they'll spend any more hours selling. It's how do I get them to increase the output for the units, the hours they do invest. Because I'm with you. I think you could theoretically go through and say, yeah, let's free up a bunch of time for sales reps, but we don't ever seem to see that materialize. So if that's the case, what can we do to make them more productive for the time they do spend?
Yeah, I worry that we are a while away from being able to do that effectively. Are there tools that you're excited about that you think could help with that?
Not to do it completely. Unfortunately, the only way to do it is manually.
Yeah.
right now, and but there are companies that do it manually. I mean, they probably have systems that support, but I mean, effectively doing it manually because people are. The way you do it is you collect the hours that people work on the tasks they work on.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's go on to another one that you talked about. I thought was an interesting term. You talk about asymmetric metric variability. So it seems like a fancy way of saying that when a metric is not estimated correctly, it's far more likely to be estimated incorrectly in only one direction, usually the positive direction.
Yeah. So an example would be if you go to the store and you get improper change from the cashier, right? How do you know if that cashier is dishonest versus they just aren't good at giving change, right? Well, you know that because if they're just not good at giving change, sometimes you're going to get too much back, sometimes you're going to get shorted. But if you always get shorted, meaning that it's asymmetric, meaning there's the returns of that outcome are much more skewed towards one direction. That's how you kind of know. And so I think that the kind of like catch-all argument in the world of sales when it comes to data is, when like number of deals goes down in a particular month or win rate goes up for a particular month or goes down, there's kind of this idea that like, oh, like it'll all even out in the long run. This is, law of large numbers, like this will all average out and will return. And I think the argument that I would make is that there are some metrics that are not going to return to some, quote unquote normal because there's a skewed distribution in those outcomes. And I think that, forecasted amounts and forecasted close dates definitely fall into that bucket.
Well, but see, I sort of take an opposite view of what you were saying. Is that you think it's far more likely that when a rep overestimates, or excuse me, you think it's far more likely that a rep will overestimate the size of a deal versus underestimate in a pipeline.
Correct.
And see, my experience has been the opposite because reps sandbag.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, that's gosh, for decades of experience I've had managing sales teams, that's been sort of the big problem. They're more likely to be too optimistic about when the deal is going to close, but they're also, at least my experience is, more likely to underestimate because they want to be the hero.
Gotcha. So then interesting. So I would say I definitely see that with enterprise reps or reps that I would say have like 10 plus years experience. But what I would say is with younger sales reps or less experienced sales reps, what I see happen a lot is that reps very rarely take into consideration the amount of discounting that will ultimately end up happening to get that deal closed. And so that ends up being a huge reason why, an opportunity that's been at 100K for the last 4 months closes one day for 60 or 70.
Okay, so there's an experience curve, or an experience discount, if you will, that takes effect.
Yeah, I mean, is that not been as much your experience? Do you think it's predominantly sandbagging?
Well, no, I think you may be onto something. I think the experienced reps are certainly going to be more accurate. Now, whether they sandbag more or less, yeah, I've seen it both ways, I guess. A lot of sandbagging, especially in the enterprise space. But yeah, I like your thought about the fact that less experienced reps may be more prone to overestimating size of a deal because they won't understand the negotiation that's take place to get the deal closed.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say, it's not particularly surprising, but I think that that also is affected by the metrics that the company manages their reps to during the quarter. So companies that really care about pipeline coverage, you're not going to get as much sandbagging because reps are pressured to bolster those opportunities because they need a certain multiple of coverage. You know what I mean? So
yeah, well, the thing you sort of counter against that though is this. So we've got these percentage of coverages we want to have, or multiples of coverage we want to have, multiples of in the pipeline, and whether it's 5 or 7 or situation dependent. But then we all see the reports, we all see the research done that's saying anywhere from 50 to one I saw last week, 80% of qualified opportunities and pipelines don't close or turn into no decisions, which means that the coverage is a myth anyway. Because if you have that much fallout out of your pipeline to deals that never close, or at least don't close on that go-round, let's say, so they reach a no decision point, then the coverage seems like a bit of a myth anyway.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how you look at it. Like, I could argue that the coverage does work because it factors in those kind of like stuff that will never close. But I would agree that in general, the idea of like managing pipeline coverage is probably not the best way to go about managing your team.
Interesting. So Greg, we're in the last segment of the show. I've got some standard questions I ask all my guests. And first one is a hypothetical scenario where you, Greg, you've just been hired as VP of sales at a company where sales have hit a rough patch. They're slowed down, and the CEO is anxious to hit the reset button, get things back on track. So what two things could you do your first week on the job that would have the biggest impact?
Good question. I guess the two things that I would do is I'd want to understand how my managers spend their time. So I'd probably work with them to figure out, how they're leading one-on-ones, what they care about, and where their blind spots are. Mm-hmm. And I'd also be interested in figuring out from our customers what they don't like about our product. And so to do that, I'd probably end up talking to customer support. In my experience, I think those people kind of have the best idea of what customers don't like about the product. So I would say meet with customer support and meet with my managers.
So, question for you. If you want to find out, what the customers thought and so on, why not talk to the customers?
You probably could do that and should do that. That's probably my personal insecurity. I'm really bad at selling. So I would probably be hesitant to talk to customers. But I would probably agree that that would probably be better. Although what I would say though is that, and we see this with the companies we work with is, talking to customers, you could very easily kind of inflate your sense of how predominant a problem is across your customer base, right? So talking to a customer service rep, he's going to distill a problem that he's heard 50 times. Whereas if I talk to a couple customers and they're really passionate about a particular problem, it's hard for me to tell how prevalent that problem is.
True. But it's not as if, it's not as if a customer success person also wouldn't have an agenda though.
That's true.
Yeah. So, okay. That's interesting. So, all right, you say you're not very good at sales, but we just have a few rapid fire questions for you about sales. So, when you are out selling your own services at Clarus Designs, what's your most powerful sales attribute? Listening.
I would say that listening to people's tones and the way that they speak is probably my best asset. I think just because I think from me being more of an auditory person, I think being able to hear in people's tones what is really important to them and right. What is more like a problem that they're repeating because that's something they hear a lot but don't really believe in. I think being able to hear what people truly have conviction in is probably my most powerful tool.
Okay. So do you have like a sales role model or a business role model?
Yeah, I mean, I would say probably business role model would be my father. I think, he was the first one in his family to go to college. Yeah, growing up, kind of looking at him, he's the person that I think of when I think about, wanting to do more with my own life.
Okay. So one book. What's one book you'd recommend every salesperson should read?
Thinking Fast and Slow. I think that, you don't necessarily need to be an expert in behavioral economics or anything like that, but I think that understanding your own biases, case in point, forecasting and things like that, but understanding your own biases, I think is a huge reason why successful salespeople do well. They understand what they're good at and what they're not good at, and they're honest about that.
Okay. So last question, what music's on your playlist?
I mostly listen to audiobooks, but when I do listen to music, I would say probably like Blink-182 or Metallica or something like that.
Blink-182, they're back and on tour.
Yeah, so excited.
Actually, I was interviewing someone recently who had seen them this summer. So he also was excited they were back. So, well, good. Well, Greg, thanks for joining us. Tell folks how they can find out more about Clarus Designs and connect with you.
You can find us on the web at clarusdesigns.com, CLARUS, or you can email me directly, greg@clarusdesigns.com. Thanks so much for your time, Andy. This was great.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. It's fun having you, and we'll have you back on to talk about it because I could dig into this forever. So, Greg, thanks. Friends, thank you for joining us this time. Remember, make it part of your day every day to deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate your success. An easy way to do that is make sure you don't miss any of my conversations with top business experts like my guest today, Greg Dalli, who shared his expertise about how to accelerate the growth of your business. And if you enjoy Accelerate and the value we're delivering, then please take a quick minute right now to leave your feedback about this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. It would be very much appreciated. So thanks again for joining me, and until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.